All right, so I'm Brian Beveridge. I'm the co-director of the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. One in the center with the cool haircut. Doesn't look like that anymore. We were asked to work with OakDOT and Transform to do this several workshops that are gathering information for the city to develop its zero emission vehicle plan. And so that was really the focus of these meetings. And we had a meeting about 6 weeks ago. We got a lot of great feedback from folks about what they thought in general about zero emission vehicles. And today we want to talk more some specifics. I'm going to pass this to my co-director, Ms. Margaret Gordon, to introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ms. Margaret Gordon with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. I'm one of the founders and co-director. Pass it on to Michael.
Yeah, I'm Michael Randolph, transportation planner at the Oakland Department of Transportation and lead planner for the Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan. Kirby, I'll pass it on to you.
Everybody, Kirby Olson, work with Michael at the Oakland Department of Transportation on this zero emission vehicle plan, and I'll pass it to Joy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Massey. I work at Transform. We're a nonprofit working in the housing and transportation advocacy and policy space. Transform has, as Brian said, partnered with the City of Oakland and WOIP to help lead the community engagement portion of the Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan. And we will end with Tehran, or for this first team introductions.
Good evening. My name is Taryn McGrew, and I work with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and community engagement with my wonderful co-directors, Mr. Brian Beveridge and Miss Margaret Gordon. This is my second meeting, and I'm excited that you guys are all here participating. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Why don't we run the list here?
Brian, before we get into introductions, why don't I just run through the agenda for today real quick, and then we can move to introductions for everyone else.
Sure.
Yeah, so just the next 10 minutes or so, we'll do participant introductions, give us your name, organization, neighborhood. And then after that, I'll quickly recap the previous workshop we had with WOP and focusing on charging in West Oakland. Then we're going to talk about briefly for 5 minutes the goals and objectives of this particular workshop. And then we're going to go into discussing the proposed actions, that draft actions we have for the zero emission vehicle plan, divided into 4 sections, focusing on infrastructure, access and education, large vehicles and delivery, and then smaller electric vehicles, e-bikes, e-scooters. And then we'll finish up with a wrap up and explain where we're headed next. Right.
Great.
Yeah, go ahead,
Brian. Let's just, we can popcorn this, but maybe it's easier if I just call on folks to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with JJ, since you're the first one on my screen?
Yeah, thank you. My name is JJ, and I work for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I'm an assistant staff specialist.
You're very quiet. Did you say you work for BlackMed?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
All right. What can you mind telling us? What part of the agency? Are you a planner or a community engagement or?
I'm essentially a grant. I work with the Clean Cars for All program, and I help with application review and everything related to the program, helping it run and function.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, JJ.
Thank you.
Gail, it looks like you got on. It looks like you got in through the front door. Why don't you go next?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I apologize for having a little bit of trouble there, but nothing like a workaround at all times. I'm Gail Stubba. I am a resident of 3rd Street and Alice, and I've been working in transportation for a long time. I recently came from the Transportation Research Board, and it's really important that everyone is part of this, because this is the only way we're going to be able to switch all the trucks and all the vehicles over to fuels that allow us mobility and don't pollute anymore the way we've been seeing it for a very long time. So thank you all. I like being part of the solution.
Great. 3rd and Alice, that's in the Jack London Square area?
It is.
Thank you. CB, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm CB. I live in Oak Center. I also currently drive electric gas hybrid that I can plug in and drive off of battery. I could do 100% of the time if there were more charging stations in West Oakland. I'm just like everybody else. I'm excited that this committee is happening, that changes are being proposed, because that's how we get changes to happen.
Terrific. Thank you, CB. How about Danny?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny. I also work with JJ at the Air District. I am a staff grant specialist working primarily on the light duty EV infrastructure grants program charge.
Sounds great. And by light duty, that means cars and things we
Yes.
might buy? Great.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And you know where the money is, so that's good. Rita, how about introduce yourself?
Good evening. Yes, I'm Rita Duncan, and I did participate in the first workshop, and I was invited by our Charlene Grant. And I am the president of the board of directors for Orloma Sanitary District, and we serve the unincorporated communities in Alameda County. And we're in the process of developing a plan to transition to our fleet to zero emission fleet. And I also want to know, as we design the plan, how can we also support the community in that? So that's why I'm really interested, and that's why I decided to join the second workshop. So thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you for being here. The unincorporated parts of the county are critically important because lots of folks live there, and they don't have city governments, or I would say they have one less layer of government to look after their interests, and so we need to make sure that these services get to everyone.
And I live. Let me
sure.
just say, I do live in Fairview, one of the unincorporated communities. And we do not have the additional layer of finances either. I mean,
Yes.
it's a yin yang kind of thing. But yes.
Well, thank you for being here. An, how about you?
Hi everyone. My name's Anh. My day job is a associate researcher at the International Council on Clean Transportation, so the ICCT. We're based in SF, but I'm also an Oakland resident, so really interested to see how we're working through it. I mean, my day job, I do a lot of just data and Excel and stuff on EV projection and charging infrastructure projection, but would like to get involved more with how community engagement would go.
Terrific, thank you. Yeah, we're all working through it. It's a big transition, isn't it? Let's see, I think we did Danny already. Zach?
Yeah, hi everyone, Zach Thompson. I'm with East Bay Community Energy. I focus on our transportation electrification programs. And so we coordinate pretty closely with the city on the ZEV action plan and support wherever we can. And I'm also an Oakland resident in the Jack London Square area.
Great, thanks, Zach. Welcome. Robert.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Gaito. I'm the operations manager for Link by Super Pedestrian, one of Oakland's dockless e-scooter providers. Our company is always pushing and on the forefront of trying to be involved of getting cities to be more electrified, and e-scooters are a great way for people without cars, or just also a fun way to get around town. So I look forward to learning more about this. This is my second meeting with you guys, and I'm excited to be here.
Very nice. Thank you. Welcome. And who have we got? Let's see, Zach. Brittany Gates. Are you there, Brittany? You're muted if you're speaking. Maybe Brittany stepped away, or so. We'll catch up with her when she gets back. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. And we got a great group here, mixture of experts in various fields and residents who are trying to make all this work in their community. So let's move on past introductions.
Great. It's great to meet everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'll just move on to my next slide. So I just want to make it clear. So something we've basically heard a lot from our outreach and the previous workshop is just more interest in the electric vehicle incentives and learning more about them. So we're not going to be able to delve deeply into the EV incentives in this workshop because we're going to be focusing more on the zero emission vehicle plan itself. But I just want to make sure everyone is aware that there's a virtual event occurring this Sunday that will specifically focus on electric vehicle incentives. And this is going to be held Sunday, 4:30 p.m. To 5:30. It'll be offered in both Spanish and English. You can learn about income qualifying rebates and individual consultation will be available. And since these incentives can be kind of complex, that's particularly important. And also there'll be a raffle for a free level 2 EV charger. So I believe Kirby just put a link to this event in chat. So if you are particularly interested in that EV incentive conversation and to delve deeply specifically on that, I definitely recommend that you try to attend that incentives clinic. So next, I'm going to move and just kind of do a brief recap of our last workshop. So just to reiterate what we discussed last time, there are three main reasons we're doing, the City of Oakland is doing a zero emission vehicle action plan. First, we have that the Governor of California, Governor Newsom's executive order from last fall, basically committing California to the elimination of the sale of any new gasoline or internal combustion passenger vehicle by 2035. So with this plan, we want to create strategies and actions that can prepare residents for this reality. And next, we're guided by Oakland's 2030 Equitable Climate Action Plan, or ECAP for short. This is Oakland's bold response to climate change. And it was adopted by City Council last summer, and it commits Oakland to achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. And so the Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan is a specific action listed in the ECAP. So through this work, we're fulfilling the ECAP and working towards that 2045 carbon neutrality goal. And then finally, there's the fact that there is a deep inequity in regards to where zero emission vehicle infrastructure is located within the City of Oakland and what communities are affected by climate change and air pollution. We talked about this specifically within West Oakland, how urgent these issues are, particularly pollution impacts, transportation, pollution causing 2,520 deaths per year in the Bay Area, over 5,000 new childhood asthma cases. And WOAB has done some very specific work on the sources of pollution, specifically in the West Oakland community. And it's just important to note that currently those who own zero emission vehicles, EVs, and have the best access to them and where that infrastructure is to support them doesn't line up with the communities that are facing challenges from air pollution and climate change the most. And so it's something we definitely want to address in the plan. So next, just so goals and objectives for this workshop. So we're gonna review the barriers to zero emission vehicles that were identified in our previous workshops. We're also gonna review some proposed locations of EV charging stations and hear some more responses for some more proposed stations from the group. And then we also are going to review and get feedback on some draft actions we developed through through our conversations in the previous workshop and some other outreach that we've done with this plan throughout the year. I'm gonna just go and we're gonna talk about some of the actions, and this is the infrastructure section.
Can we just take a second though, Michael, to see if there are any questions or reactions
sure.
to what was just presented?
If anyone has any specific questions about kind of the quick recap before we get into some of the specific actions we have drafted.
Could we, I just want to say, could we go back a slide? Is it one slide? Maybe it's two. The data slide?
Yeah, sure, yes.
Just to point out something for folks who are in 607, 608. This is new data from a very recent health impact study. And of course, it talks about the entire Bay Area, but it's important to recognize for those of us who live within the zone of this map, roughly, that half the new cases of asthma in census tracts in West Oakland, some census tracts, are due to NOx, nitrogen oxide emissions, which are primarily in this community. We don't have a power plant nearby, so primarily in this community, these are transportation vehicle emissions. And so when we struggle all the many years in the past with working on asthma, and of course we thought, and we were correct, a great deal of it was from particulate matter, but NOx is a sort of ubiquitous chemical, but it is localized in some ways, and so it's important that we be thinking about that. That street by street and block by block, we can make changes by getting rid of these emissions. It doesn't take the entire Bay Area to solve it. We can solve it on smaller scale, so that it feels more achievable to me sometimes, if I can think in a little smaller scale. So I just wanted to point that out. It's very different in census tracts in the Oakland Hills. Nothing against people in the hills, but in some of those census tracts, it's only 2 out of 10 new cases of asthma, and that's not a very good thing to say. Only 2 out of 10. It's 20% of new cases. So we have a common foe in vehicle emissions. Not just for the climate, not just for polar bears, but for children and people living right here in our own communities. That's my little speech. So let's move on. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. I think CB, your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to ask if, because at the last meeting, we did talk about light duty, specifically car charging. Are we going to talk about this meeting or no?
The main focus is going to be light duty, but we are going to briefly mention kind of larger vehicles, heavy and medium duty, and like delivery, and also micromobility, e-bikes and e-scooters as well.
All right, so I'll give the controls back to you, Michael.
Cool. All right. So here, I'll dive into some of the draft actions. So what we did is we kind of came up with barriers that we heard from our previous outreach and workshops, and tried to come up with proposed actions to address those barriers to zero emission vehicles. First barrier, a lack of safe and affordable electric vehicle charging in the community. Some possible actions that we can pursue. We can locate public chargers with robust community input through an equitable implementation plan. Basically just making sure that we have a policy and program in place when we do put infrastructure in underserved communities like West Oakland, and that we're making sure that the right amenities are there, and that we have kind of a prioritization list in place of locations that are beneficial for the community. We can also create permits for residents to install chargers on the curb in front of their homes. Some equity considerations for that type of program: we could waive permit fees for residents in underserved communities, and also make sure we prioritize residents that want to make that curbside charger, that smaller individual curbside charger, publicly accessible. And we could also subsidize charging for low-income users. Another barrier we heard were just unreliable, unsafe public transit options in some neighborhoods. We can possibly install mobility hubs to enhance transit, and also additionally provide charging. For those that don't know, mobility hubs are basically the idea of co-locating many different types of transportation amenities in the same spot. And so you can have car share and bike share and EV charging and nice, safe, comfortable places to wait for public transit as well. Some more actions around infrastructure. Another barrier, the difficulty of providing charging in apartment buildings. This is something that was particularly important. Actions to address this is we can provide education and incentives for EV chargers for apartment owners to install this. We can, with this, we can prioritize affordable housing developments. And we can also try to empower tenants to install their own chargers if, for whatever reason, the apartment building they're in or their landlord isn't able to. Another barrier we heard about were many concerns about the environmental impacts of both new and old infrastructure, basically the new infrastructure coming in and what might be left behind as we transition to a mostly electrified transportation system. Possible actions, we can create a program of EV battery recycling. We can make sure we have a policy in place to deal with old gasoline infrastructure and what is happening to those old locations. And then also we heard people were concerned about what possible safety issues might come up with the shift to more electrified transportation. So we just want to make sure we're coordinating with the fire department on potential safety issues and making sure we're keeping in mind any environmental justice impacts. So those are kind of the draft actions we have around in the infrastructure section. Fine, I'll pass it off to you talking about these
Sure.
slides.
Sure. So these are some draft ideas, and they are the result of feedback we got from folks, concerns that we got from workshop 1. And there have been corresponding workshops taking place in the Fruitvale neighborhood in the Spanish-speaking community. So what we wanted to do here was just get sort of take the temperature of these ideas and see. These could all be in a plan. Some of them could be in a plan. We want to go around and see one by one. We have a small enough group here today. We don't have to divide into breakout sessions. But we'd like to get kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs sideways or something on each of these ideas. This isn't a finite list. We'll check. We want to follow this little exercise with asking you all what's missing on this list. But to start with, to help the planners know where they're headed, let's just go through these one more time, and one at a time, let's see if we can get how many of you feel that these are a good idea that should be in the plan. And for this purpose, let's use our thumbs up reaction tool down there at the bottom. So prioritizing communities like West Oakland for equitable access to chargers through a process of robust community input. I think that would be the summary. So basically prioritizing the Flatlands communities for chargers somewhere. So we've got a bunch of thumbs up. We've got some here. We got An and Robert, Gail. Thumbs up, Danny. Keep those thumbs up so we can sort of document them. Danny, Zach. Still haven't heard from Brittany. Are you out there, Brittany? Maybe not. I think I have to educate before engaging in EIP, equitable.
Yeah.
CB,
so-
what is EIP? Remind me.
Yeah,
So
CB.
equitable implementation plan.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
CB, we have we have some actions that are specifically focused on access and education. I think that was something that was also brought up, and we'll dive into some of those actions after
Yeah,
we
I
talk
think
about
they're a little
infrastructure.
further down. So let's, looks like a bunch of people like this idea. Let's, is there anybody who doesn't think prioritizing, and I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, maybe perfectly good reasons. Is there anyone who doesn't think prioritizing communities like West Oakland should be a priority in getting chargers out? We're, and certainly we're open to, this is a discussion, right? I'm going to take silence as a no, and we'll move on.
Sorry, Brian, I just realized that Miss Margaret has her hand raised.
Oh, okay, Miss Margaret.
I just wanted to, under the equity considerations, to somewhere part of the education that for the third item, prioritize subsidized programs for low and affordable, low income and affordable apartment buildings, that should be in the parentheses, that's some of these buildings have to be up-coded for receiving charger stations
Sure.
inside of the buildings. And so that would mean building code would take place. And how do we prioritize older buildings simultaneously as the building of new apartments, new housing? Who will get consideration first? So we have to really be mindful of that.
Yes, I think that's a really important issue. And for CB's point, you are correct. There's a branding piece that goes with these chargers, and Tesla is probably the most obvious example. I happened to be at a conference on this subject last 2 weeks ago, sponsored by UC Davis. Tesla was there, and they apparently are working on a generic charger that they would like to be putting in places. So that's an interesting idea. Let's see. So can we go back to the previous slide? We're kind of jumping around here. So education is a primary thing, but let's roll through these and then capture ideas as we go.
Wait, this is Rita.
Sorry, Rita, go ahead.
It's okay. I had a question, and you probably have answered this in your previous presentations, and it just didn't stick with me. So the priority is to install chargers. And so the assumption is that more people are going to be able to afford, the low emission vehicles. Is that correct?
I think there's a chicken and egg question that continues to plague us. And that is, like, with no chargers, people won't buy the vehicles, no matter how many incentives we give them. And so the idea is there are fair amount of incentives. You can get up to $9,500 depending on your circumstance. And those incentives apply to used vehicles. So you may be able to get an electric car for a few $1,000s, equal to buying a used gasoline car. So the real stumbling block is the fact that there isn't generally convenient recharging infrastructure. And so that, I think, is the key to this discussion, which is really about where do we put chargers and how do we do it equitably. And then, of course, there's the education component. Why should people want a car and charge it? And then there's all sorts of other issues like jobs and who gets to put the chargers in. But essentially, we're addressing the chicken and egg. Will people buy an electric car and hope there's a charger, or do they need to see chargers on the street before they're willing to make that commitment?
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, because if it's convenient, you know, people will probably maybe lean in that direction to purchase one, because I know a couple of people who turned in their cars because it was too much of a hassle to try to find a charge. They were commuting, you know, from the Central Valley to San Francisco, so they just, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
And my other question, and this is because I just don't know enough about it. So who would maintain the cost of the charging station?
So
go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, it definitely would depend on who owns them. And I think like towards the end, I'll kind of go over the kind of different like owners and how they can be funded. They could be privately owned, and then it would be whoever owns them. It could be publicly owned, government owned. It just really depends on how they're funded and how they're and where they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's important to recognize that we are talking about a completely new methodology. It may involve players like who typically have sold us gasoline, but it may not. It may involve a whole plethora of other structures and, you know, pricing processes and, you know, credit card use or pay, you know, however it gets paid for and whoever owns it. These things remain open questions. And the real question here is, how do we equitably distribute this asset so that, you know, it isn't only people who have a garage and a plug? Because I will tell you, about 54% of the people nationwide who've been surveyed, for them, charging at home is the most important thing about buying an electric car. But in our communities, most people are not going to be able to charge at home. And so that's what this whole process is about. How do we get publicly available chargers into the community so that it inspires people to want to buy these vehicles? So let's see, was there another hand up? Was Gail's hand still up?
I think it was Gail's hand, if I'm not mistaken.
Hi.
Thank you for answering my question. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rita, for your input. It seems to me you're right. A lack of safe, affordable EV charging in the community is a real barrier. And it would seem to me that an equity consideration is that people who, to have equitable access, may be thinking about how to do it at apartment buildings, and the largest apartment buildings would mean the most people who live there that would have the opportunity.
Yes, I think that's true. And so we have to figure out how they don't get locked behind parking garage gates. So this one that was there, this is, I think, an important question. If we go back one slide, we'll move through these more quickly, but this is good dialogue.
We have one more hand raised, Brian, as I'm monitoring.
Oh, okay. On.
Yes, thank you.
Let's get, let's. Go ahead, on.
You're on mute, on.
Yeah, I'm trying, I guess, gearing my question toward the permit part, just to help us get back on that track. And I was wondering if we have talked to, for example, City of Berkeley. They did have the pilot on having permit for curbside for resident, and if we learn a lot from their barriers and what came out of it, and do we see any potential new barrier coming up with during the process of creating permit. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, I can answer that. We've talked with Berkeley and kind of have looked at this issue, and I think they're the big thing, and I think thinking of it from an equity lens, they were, for the most part, the people that were able to go through the permit process were usually wealthy, and they were able to construct the charger and make sure they had everything in place to have that done. So currently in Oakland, we don't have any process like that, but for people that do not have a garage or a driveway in order to charge their vehicle, where they need to, most people are putting their vehicle out on the curb, you'll have examples of people just like having a power line, like a outlet across the sidewalk, which isn't safe. And so we want to have some type of way to, like, if people feel like they can put something at the curb, that they can do it safely and do it efficiently. But also we know that it is expensive, so we want to think about way, like, how can we do this equitably? For example, we could possibly waive permit fees for residents in underserved communities or particular zip codes, and we could prioritize public access. So if a neighbor or even an organization wants to put together a charger by the curb, if they're public accessible, we can prioritize that, waive fees. And so we need to have further discussions with kind of like our permitting team and engineers to see how this works, because this is new and it's different, and we don't have it in place, and it's something we need to develop in order to encourage more chargers and just low scale chargers to solve like this particular issue, which is just residential charging at the curb.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Michael. That helps. Thanks.
Yeah. I think one way to think of this list is every one of these could be a 3-day conversation. If we really dig into the issues that might be involved. I think the real not the purpose here, but the real opportunity here, or the real thing we want to find out is, do you all think that curbside chargers should be in the plan? It's going to involve all sorts of changes and permitting and stuff, and then the other piece, do you think that I should be able to install a charger at the curb in front of my house? And if so, do I have to share it with anybody, or can I make it mine? I think there are a variety of questions here, but we might say curbs aren't a good place for chargers. We should put them in parking lots. We should put them at grocery stores. We should put them other places. So that's really the question here. Do you think this should be in the plan for Oakland? I see a thumbs up. Any more thumbs up? Let's see, I gotta click the box, click the thing. I see thumbs up here, good. Generally a positive looking thing. All right. So let's try subsidized charging for low-income users and prioritizing low-income affordable apartment buildings. Is this the one, CB, where you were making note that it probably should include other, not just apartment buildings, but smaller multi-unit structures?
Yes, because I think a lot of the affordable housing in West Oakland is informal, right? So, an apartment unit that has 5 people in it, that maybe wasn't designed for 5 people, but becomes a type of affordable housing. In addition to, the fact that West Oakland has wonderful, huge apartment buildings that are, run by HUD and that whole kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like my street has duplexes and maybe a triplex and a couple things that don't particularly have, parking on site. So I think that falls back into this area of curbside. It doesn't make sense for curbside spaces. And then, should we be, moving folks toward a model in which they go to a parking lot somewhere? Let's see. We already asked the question about this. Did I already do the thumbs up for this one? I forget.
Right. It also could be both and. Where is not a attractive nuisance of safety for the sidewalk, and also for a parking lot or any such a thing, could be in a church parking lot, a grocery store, inside of a garage of apartment building. But we always have to look at the safety precautions of
Sure.
where these things are being placed.
Yeah. Last one here. Should we cluster these things?
Yeah, I think we should, because we want to make sure we get through all of them. So
Yeah. No, I'm just asking the folks. Would you want to walk down the street to a place where there's a parking lot and there's a plug-ins, there's scooters, there's electric bikes, everything's there, and it's at a BART station or somewhere like a bus stop. Do you want to do it that way? Is that something we should consider? Thumbs up.
Yeah, and absolutely. A mobility hub isn't just a parking lot. We want to definitely make sure they're their own thing and have their own rules around them. It's not just a place to put cars.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we will need a greater discussion on what a mobility hub actually is then, probably, right? That's going to be a real issue. Clarifying what these terms of art mean so the public understands what someone's talking about when they're asked these questions. That's a key thing for us in our work. The public, if we ask people questions, we should be using words that they already understand. So let's
Brian, we need to move on to some of the other topics. So I just want to, before we move on to,
yeah, there's a few people that have their hand raised though as well.
Yeah, we can answer questions though. CV.
I just want to say that the reason I'm saying parking lots are their own issue is we have a lot of folks in West Oakland who live in their cars. And so, for example, the West Oakland Public Library might be a great place to put 10 chargers, but planning needs to be done for, what if somebody's charging there and living in their car? How, is there a time limit? Are people only charging for 4 hours? Whereas if you're at a mobility hub, you would expect somebody to plug in and go to work and be gone for 9 hours. So I just think they're completely different categories with completely different needs and discussions that need depth.
Yeah, kind of where we place chargers, it kind of depends on, so there's level 2, which might be a couple hours, and then level 3, which is very fast, between 30 minutes and an hour, and different locations may work better for different types of charging and different speeds.
And not all those speeds are available to all kinds of cars, just as a heads up.
Yeah, but that also goes back to the not having public education on those details that you got talked about. Are we really invested in making sure people have those details about the level of charging?
I do want to make sure we have enough time to talk about kind of like the specifics of where chargers are in West Oakland. I just want to briefly go over some factors to consider when we do want to put chargers in. I think that was a good jumping off point. So when we're looking at the charging system, especially where we want to put them, we want to think about, how easily can it be funded and built? Like, who owns the particular location? Is it private or public right of way? Utilization is something that is thought of, and kind of what is the expected future use? How often can we expect people to use a location? How often? Public accessibility, is it open to the public, or is it in a private garage that's closed on like weekends and nights? Equitable access, is it serving an underserved neighborhood and places lacking a zero emission vehicle infrastructure? And then additional amenities is kind of going back to the idea of mobility hubs. Are there other things around it? Is it providing charging for other things? Is there public transit around? And just kind of from the interactive map and some conversations we had in previous workshops, thinking about kind of proposed locations specifically in Oakland that the city could possibly prioritize and look to partner with putting in locations. Well, I've split them up between those that are very clearly in the city public right of way and those that are in private, or the city would have to make sure we're partnering with other government entities. So this includes West Oakland BART, the Acorn Town Center and Courtyards, DeFermery Park, West Oakland Library, the EB Mud Lots, and Community Foods Market. And so I was just like wondering if anyone, and Brian, I'll let you lead just for maybe like a little bit, if anyone has any specific things they want to ask about, like where specifically they'd like to see charging, maybe just like for 5 minutes, if people could either in chat or just say what they might think specifically where they would like to see charging.
Bunch of folks want to jump into the weeds. Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of this discussion. Well, here's a slide that shows you potential public spaces. There are only 2 of them. It shows you where there are current public chargers. They're all over in the old Oakland downtown corridor. Where would people like to see chargers? West Oakland BART won't have any parking on it in another couple years. City Slickers Farm. I think that possibly the post office parking garage. Yeah, it's a good idea. I don't even know what goes on in the post office parking garage. It seems underutilized to me. That might be a good idea. Lowell Park. So the question is, parks is, are they curbside parking spaces? Are they curbside chargers? Do we take up space in the parks? What do folks think? I mean, CB already mentioned West Oakland Library, obviously could use some chargers. Every one of these spaces suggests what CB already raised. And I think we have to tease apart, I think, some of these issues. So there are people sleeping in cars all over West Oakland. If that's an issue and whether we can put in chargers or not, that may be a long process of chargers. So the NL bus, you mean along the line? CB, go ahead and open your microphone. What are you suggesting?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly where along the line, but because the NL bus runs 24/7 for service workers who can't take BART, and also there's a lot of well, I don't know if they'd be candidates for this, but there are a lot of like kids that use the NL to go to school for high school, and there are also some folks who participate in programs on like Treasure Island, who sometimes like that might be a route for them. So I don't know. I'm thinking somewhere along the NL route might be a good place for either charging or a mobility hub. We don't actually have a casual carpool in West Oakland, but we could.
Mm-hmm. And how would charging link to bus lines? They seem almost contrary to each other. If you're already riding a bus, why do you need a charger?
It depends on why you're driving into the city and where from. So I think for some people, especially folks who work, sort of around that Transbay hub, it might make sense to leave their car in East Oakland or West Oakland charging and just hop on the bus instead. It also decreases the amount of traffic on the bridge, which decreases.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Any other ideas?
Gail, is your hand up?
Hi there. Yes, I wanted to chat a moment about mobility hubs and ask a question because I'd like to link mobility hubs with affordability. I know that there are some mobility hubs for interest, for example, at the Amtrak station, where in order to access a charger, it's pretty expensive. It's $160 a month or, $10 to go there. So I want to make sure that as we cite these chargers, if they're at mobility hubs, they're not tariffed because we want people to use them. And we want to make sure that equity is at the top of the list.
Right.
Can I ask you, Gail, can you clarify that you don't want them to be tariffed? Do you mean you want the electricity to be free?
I don't know that one can do that, but I don't think there should be a charge to just access the physical space.
Oh, it shouldn't cost you $1 just to plug in. You should just pay for the charging then, right? Yeah, there are some programs where the city's looking at trying, providing free parking space for the period of your charging event. I think it's a really important question. How much does it cost to charge? CB may have some ideas, or other folks who have ideas about that. It is not cheap, and in some ways, depending on time and circumstances, is not comparable to buying gasoline for the same miles. But that's an important question that I don't think is really been clarified in the whole process.
Yeah, CB, on your point about like the parking lot and the kind of just BART, so especially if we want to see chargers at BART, the city is going to have to partner with BART because that's not city owned and they're making the decision there. We are, I think BART is working on kind of like what their charging policy is looking like in the next couple of years, and we're going to be talking to their board about that their next, I think in November, and kind of seeing how, making sure that our plans are lined up with what they want, and kind of argue that like we're trying to expand like charging system in Oakland and make sure it's accessible, and BART has to be a really important partner there. Gail, on your part about like access, I think, and like making sure it's like affordable, I think I want to segue into kind of like the access and education barriers and actions, and especially because I think these were things that were mentioned pretty clearly earlier on that people wanted to talk about. I think one of the big barriers we heard was that just a high cost of buying a new electric vehicle, and so we can explore maybe cities level subsidies for zero emission vehicles. And this doesn't just include the cars, this can also include for personal e-bikes, e-scooters. We could also look to implement an affordable neighborhood electric vehicle car sharing program, so that maybe not assuming that everyone has to own their own electric vehicle, but maybe they can also just rent one from time to time. We know that there's employment dependence on the gasoline automobile industry. And so we want to make sure we have a plan to retrain and rehire workers that might be losing their jobs in the gasoline industry as we make that transition, kind of the just transition. Make sure we're building long-term relationships with unions, and then also making sure we're helping local businesses make this transition to zero emission vehicles through education and knowledge. Like the big barrier, a lack of knowledge about the technology and a lack of knowledge about the incentives. Something that I think is just come up over and over again, something we've been asked for, and we don't necessarily have the resources in this planning process to do, but we need to fund like a program for ongoing zero emission vehicle outreach, letting people know about the incentives, letting people know about the technology and how it is and how it could work. And then also including this a curriculum at OUSD and the community colleges as well. And then kind of going back to kind of dependence on the gasoline industry that currently exists. Oh, I forgot to change this one. Sorry that accidentally repeated. But basically, what this should say is having clean mobility job fairs, making sure we have workforce training programs, and then also having making sure we're like trying to understand the barriers that contractors are facing when they're trying to work with the city, and maybe particularly like local contractors and minority electricians to help us do this work. Sorry, I missed that I did not have the correct ones there. So those are just kind of the actions we have surrounding access and education.
Any thoughts on all of that?
There's a good conversation going on in the chat.
I know we got two conversations going.
Oh yes, okay, yeah.
Gig cars have been scaled way back.
Yeah, I also have a question. Is there a way that the city also partner up with private sector like this? I know we mentioned we have car sharing, but I was wondering, like the gig car, people have known the name, they have built a little bit more of a name in the area. So I was wondering, are you thinking of creating a city-owned version of car sharing? Or if yeah, if not, what's the direction you think we might go with the portable
Kirby?
EV car sharing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can take that one because I manage that program. GIG does have an electric vehicle car share program in Sacramento that's operated with Bolt electric vehicles. They got a big grant to do that, but that same grant also funded a more community-centered model that a nonprofit runs. So I think we would want to give GIG the opportunity to operate electric vehicles here, but we can't necessarily rely on them as the only option. And so we might want to pursue multiple types of programs.
I think there are programs that are popping up. I just met some folks at a conference last week that are from Sacramento and the Central Valley. They have something called Mio Car. It's targeted directly at the Spanish-speaking community. It's a car share program in the Central Valley. I think that I don't think, and the folks from the city can correct me, but I don't think we're going to see a kind of government-run program. It is a process of making available spaces for this to happen and smoothing the way. All this permitting stuff, that smooths the way to make it easier. I don't see any reason why we couldn't have a homegrown version of some of these things if there were financing available. It is a wide open territory, and that is both the blessing and the curse. So that's really why we're asking y'all, what do you think should go in a plan? Because the plan will guide the city in how they want to approach making the opportunity available, whatever the opportunity is, whether it's driveways, parking lots, mobility hubs, libraries, private parking lots, gas stations. Where would you like to see these things? And how would you like them to be made equitably accessible are really the core questions.
I just have a quick comment, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just still going back a little bit to the car sharing, I might be a little contrarian on this in the sense of like, I definitely agree with, we can't rely on just gig car and doing it, but to make car sharing more equitable in a way that like, if we have a lot of program and people can be confused on, like the function of how they, car sharing, like apps or the way that they do it. I'm just trying to think like say kind of like analogy with the Tesla chargers and like other chargers. Other things can't use Tesla can use other. It's just like if we're doing car sharing or any program or any like program with a lot of with a lot of different options, must be a way to make sure that people understand they're the same or that's one of the things I'm wary about if we're like trying to develop a lot of things.
It isn't. I don't know if this is CB's car. I was in a friend's car recently, a plug-in electric hybrid, and right on the screen, you punch a button and it says, "Here's where all the charging stations are, and how far away they are." I think one of the things that we have to be thinking about is that current conditions are not reflective of what this whole new world will look like. But we need to design the new world, right? All of your comments are really important because they all reflect in my mind the need for people to learn what it means, to learn what the whole new worldview of electric and renewable energy means and how it works. So far, it's just being built by the private sector mostly. And so these are core questions that you're all raising. And I think this plan is a first shot at trying to deal with some of those.
Yeah, I just want to move on briefly to the large vehicles and delivery, kind of the barriers we see these actions being with is kind of, we heard about just a lack of diversity in the affordable EVs available. I think when we think of car share, we think of mostly just like the lighter duty electric vehicles, but also just thinking about having accessibility to electric vans, accessible vans, and electric trucks. Just seeing that there's maybe different types of vehicles available. I think something that's like the larger vehicles tend to be more expensive, and people have said like, well, I have a large family, I need a larger car. If I want to make this transition, I want access to a larger vehicle. Then also just we could provide subsidies for local businesses to buy cargo e-bikes, larger e-bikes to replace some of those big trucks. Also just hearing about kind of as a barrier, excessive vehicle traffic on the street that can discourage bike and transit. CB, you mentioned you like the idea of a zero emission vehicle zone. Santa Monica currently has a pilot, and so kind of this action would be maybe the City of Oakland looking into, okay, how would a zero emission vehicle zone, delivery zone work in the City of Oakland? What neighborhoods we want to pilot it in? What equity considerations of possible, the impacts of different locations, and it would be something that we would really want to study and make sure we're doing right. And then also there's autonomous delivery robots. I don't know if some of you might have seen them in Berkeley, but one thing we could do is allow them. But I know sometimes people have certain ideas about that, if they're a good idea or a bad idea. But yeah, also I think I just definitely want to, while we still have time, go to just talk about the micromobility actions as well. So a barrier, some people feel that there's a high cost of these shared mobility programs. And Gail, this is calling back to kind of what you were talking about at access and maybe some of the high cost of some transportation options. There is an idea of universal basic mobility program, and this would be basically subsidies we could give for transit or any type of shared mobility, and this would be just like a card that people have that they could use for any type of transportation option. We could also create an e-bike lending library, as opposed to works differently than a kind of traditional bike share, but connecting it to a library where you kind of check out an e-bike like it's a library book, and there actually is something planned for 2022. We can lobby the state to eliminate the driver's license requirement for e-scooters. Currently, you need a driver license to use an e-scooter, and that kind of blocks it off for people that don't have access to driver license and can't have that. Another barrier, people just said, a lack of safe bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that prevents them from using these e-micromobility options. We have a bike and pedestrian plan, and the city needs to implement them to have better bike and pedestrian infrastructure. We can better require the require the promotion of adaptive shared e-bikes and e-scooters. These vehicles do exist, just a lot of people don't know about them. And then also we can build more secure parking for bikes. People fear like that their bike is going to get stolen, especially if it was an e-bike. So we want to make sure we have locations that people feel safe putting their bike. And so you can have sort of bike storage at the curb as well. So yeah, Brian, I'll open up for just, we can talk a bit about the micromobility and delivery.
We have a few people that had their hands raised as you were talking.
Sure, yes.
You know, that's a lot of information that was just presented. And just want to reiterate that we will share a lot of the resources, including the presentation and recording of this session with everyone, and still want to open up for more communication after this workshop, right? Because we're not going to get to everything, but we also want to make sure we hear from everyone. So I saw, and thank you for those who are engaging in the chat. This is great ideas here. I saw Robert, I think, with your hand raised, and also Miss Margaret. Let me know if that's a new hand from you or a previous one that you didn't. I saw your hand raised for a second.
Yes, my hand was raised for a second.
Okay, let's start with you first.
Okay, who's first?
You, because your hand has been raised for the longest.
Okay, and let's go back to the one with the big truck.
Yes, there's like 3 slides back.
Yeah. I think one of the things here, based on the vicinity of the Port of Oakland right now, having them come and to explain their updates on their electric trucks and charging station planning would be good. But as far as equity goes, you can't, I don't know how it says here, a study possible to equity impact of the different locations. And I'm trying to understand, what does that mean? Does that mean that you want to place trucks outside of their normal truck routes, or what is being asked here? That's not very clear. Yeah, that's not very clear with this picture of these trucks based on the Port of Oakland and the facility and how their operations. So that needs to be clarified.
Question, Margaret, because you would probably be the best one to answer this. Are there any things coming from the port for local delivery?
The port does not do local delivery.
Because that's my understanding of this is it's a vehicle delivery zone for local delivery.
Two different things.
Right.
Yes. About half the trucks using frontage road are for local delivery or passing through. Half the trucks on frontage road are going to the port. There are lots of trucks working in Oakland that are not port trucks and working in West Oakland. I think a key question here on multiple levels: trucks, local delivery vehicles, local small businesses who want to buy an electric van. One might expect that those folks would have on-site private charging for those vehicles. If they don't, one might expect that they would need to park those commercial vehicles in some parking lot that is private for that purpose, and that should have charging as well. Public charging for residents to drive electric vehicles is a different sector of this process. And I think it's important that those be separated in the plan because they have very different requirements and very different expectations of the user, both the users and the infrastructure.
So I would suggest that on this card at the top where it says large vehicles and delivery, I would put local large vehicles and local delivery, just to make it 100% clear. And then you can put like a link or something like that to the ports plan, because that's a whole other thing that you guys have negotiated with them, that this wouldn't cover.
But at the same time, CB in the audience, there is no crossover between what the port is doing and what the city is doing. Outside of the truck management plan, that's a totally different thing. And we as residents of West Oakland, based on these local delivery, have never had the study that says how many of these local delivery companies are here, because they come from everywhere.
In most cases, port-related trucks are parked in private yards. Those yards should have infrastructure for charging, which would then, it's the same issue, it's the same chicken and egg, right? A commercial truck owner is not going to buy an electric tractor if he doesn't know he can park it somewhere at a reasonable price where he can plug it in and get it charged. And so these things have to be divided. We have to separate personal vehicles, whether they're shared or not shared, whether I own it or I share it with the people on my block. We have to separate those and the necessary infrastructure from commercial operations, just like they're supposed to be separated now. We shouldn't have our curbside space being used as a parking and logistics space for big port trucks. So we have to separate those, and this is a good opportunity to do it as we move into an electrified transportation system.
I think, and to be honest with you guys, I think there's also a piece of this where, like, focusing on what can be done locally in this plan will be better than trying to loop in a bunch of other things which might get corporate attention. So just as an example, I think, Hodo Soy, which is a local company, which is based on Adeline, which is certainly creating food product, putting it in a big truck and sending it to a warehouse or for distribution, right? Is much easier to convince to get electric than McDonald's, who is receiving food from, a big semi truck that parks outside of their, at 2 a.m, I don't know, 4 days a week or whatever. So I think if we're going to achieve the local, we might want to stay focused on the local and deal with the bigger fish in a different plan so that they're not showing up to meetings and like distracting.
Could be a good idea.
Robert, your hand's up.
Yeah, this was more when we were talking about micromobility. I do just want to note, on the slide it did say like high cost of shared mobility programs. So I know other e-scooter providers also have this, but we do have a low income program that is like honestly criminally unutilized by the City of Oakland. We do our best to promote this program. We offer 70% off of the fare to people that qualify for low income. So there's definitely programs that are there. I think they just need a little bit more visibility for these groups, because we were really proud of the work we've been able to do in the community in East and West Oakland for low income users, and we would love to see more people utilizing our low income programs, because it's about 70% off of a normal fare, which really does bring that price down to a good space.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same issue with the EV incentives, or people just kind of, there needs to be kind of like this a general education piece about all of these mobility options that just is really, really missing, and there just aren't the resources to make sure people know that this is going and they do have the ability to use these things.
I have a question about accessibility, not equity accessibility, but accessibility in general. How much do people know about where to even find these assets? Because I don't know. Maybe someone wants to inform me. Maybe if I download an app, I can find out where all the loose scooters are, or
yes. So specifically for Link, if you download the Link app, it activates your GPS, and it shows you a map of every available unit and their not only their battery life, but how many miles you can get out of that battery. So it's super useful. You could even plan your trip around it. If a vehicle has a lower battery, you could do the math, be like, well, I can't make it to Mandela Parkway from where I am, so I'll go and rent another one. We also, on our link.city/Oakland page, we have resources for all of our users to suggest hubs for us, and we actually take those into consideration so we can make sure we're deploying our scooters in places where the community wants them.
And so this is a totally not off topic, but has not been discussed. Car share programs usually work in a parking lot somewhere. Scooter programs work by having them just distributed wherever people happen to leave them. Or I guess you pick them up at night and you charge them and put them back out in clusters in places. Should a car share program work like that? This is for everybody. Should I go just look at a app and say, oh, there's a car at the curb somewhere nearby, and it's got half a battery charge? Because right now we're trying to figure out where do we put infrastructure to charge a thing, and it requires that we build infrastructure. So if gig cars work that way, as CB's informing me, people fuel those cars, right? Or does someone go get them at night and charge them? The gig cars are picked up at night for charging?
No, they're not. They're gas powered. They're hybrids, and actually most of the users fill them up.
Right. So we don't solve the problem of charging with the gig car model at this point.
I also want to be mindful, we're coming close to the end of time, so I kind of want to make sure I have a wrap up and then allow people to say kind of like their lingering comments and thoughts. So we shared kind of like a draft of all these proposed actions, and we're going to share with you after the meeting like the list of them, so you can kind of see them again, and you can give us any further feedback. But beyond the city, there are all these ways that these actions can possibly be funded. And the idea of having a plan like this is once we have it written, we have it approved by city council, that allows us to go for many grant funds and actually get these actions funded. It's much easier to get things funded when we have a plan like this saying like the city wants these things done to achieve these goals. This is how we go for funding. And so there's many different levels. I'll just go through it. Federal, like climate congestion mitigation and air quality improvement program, through the state like Caltrans, California Energy Commission, Sustainable Communities Grant, or Cal EVIP. PG&E is a possible source. There is the EV fast charge program that PG&E has. They're currently looking at a location near Lime Creek Crossing in which affordable housing development in East Oakland. And they're interested in funding a project there. Bay Area Air Quality Management District, they have a charge program. East Bay Community Energy has been partnering with the city and is making investments in this realm. Also, there are private companies, like what's mostly happened is that private companies are setting up chargers. You have examples like EVgo in Lafayette Square. There is something that should be opening soon around Lake Park. And then there is individual residents are able to hope, like I said, kind of a callback to that permitting program could be a source of getting chargers out there. So just to say that there's many different ways that these actions could possibly be funded, and having them in the plan is kind of helping us towards actually like getting that funding and having things go forward. And then finally,
I have a question, Michael.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Over by, we haven't talked about, in fact, street charging seems to have been not a high priority in this process. CB mentioned some places for street chargers, and there is a bank of chargers on the street over by, what is it called, Jackson Park? They call it Old Man Park over there. Jackson and what is it, MLK? Is that an option? Is that an option in West Oakland? Is that part of what the city's considering? Are those banks of chargers next to public spaces? Yeah, Lafayette Square Park.
Lafayette Square Park. Yeah, it would be locations like that.
I just did a little breakdown of the different private models. I do think we should do a walking tour at some point in Emeryville. EVgo at Old Man's Park only has one, like maybe two kinds of plugs that most cars don't take. So that's why it's almost always empty. They have like an older kind of plug. But yeah, I don't want to bog down the meeting with too many details, but.
Well, standardization is something we should be demanding.
Right.
Miss Margaret?
Yes, but I'm just trying to hone us back to this process is about West Oakland. And we also need to have, one of the things that we need to have, Brian just showed an earlier map regarding West Oakland. And are we using that map? What map are we using defining West Oakland? Are we defining West Oakland all the way to downtown, all the way to the port, over to where East Bay Mud is? What? So we need to have a geographic understanding and boundaries of what we're defining as West Oakland, if this is about West Oakland.
Thank you,
because we haven't, why I'm saying this, the EBC charging stations that they put it on at the 12th street parking garage, identify that as West Oakland. Have identified that because of maps that they saw relating to barrier air quality as part of a bigger strategy program that we're involved in called AB 617. So we need to have a really narrow down this, what is this boundaries of West Oakland? If this is about West Oakland.
I think it's important to think about what is the behavior model. We're caught up in where to put stuff based on a lot of different issues, but what is the behavior model for fueling a vehicle? CB may be one of the only people on this call that is a resident and understands somewhat of the behavior model. So I don't put gas in my car in my driveway. I drive across town somewhere and I do that. So the question is that the behavior model? And if so, access is a very different question. If the behavior model that we're hoping for, or we all like to see, is I can charge in my driveway or right in front of my house or down the block, that's a different challenge. And I think we need to address that different behavior that's growing up around electric vehicles. And so as we think about whether it's in West Oakland or it's somewhere, you know, there's only a couple of gas stations in West Oakland now. You know, I usually go over by the shopping center that I go to in Alameda and buy gas. So I think we need to think so we don't confound the change, because the more barriers and questions we put in front of the change, the longer it takes to figure out where to put a charger. And so this is a really important question for us all. I don't have the answer to it. I just think that we all need to be thinking about what we expect. If we got into our electric car and it said you have 5% left, what would you expect the experience to be to go and get 100%, right?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, keeping mindful that we're going a little ahead of time, and I also just want to allow people to have their final comments. Just looking forward to what we're trying to do next. You can provide further feedback online. We have a survey, we have an interactive map where you can place where you'd like to possibly see chargers. Yeah, Kirby also put a link to, just so if you would like to be on the email list and make sure you know kind of any further events we might have or when the draft plan is released. There'll be an outreach report about both of the workshops that happen in Fruitvale and this one here. And we'll also make sure we'll have a document for everyone to look at some resources that we talked about and all the information we talked about today. Planning to try to get the draft of the plan out for comment in November 2021, so next month. And then we're trying to present the plan to City Council in either January or February next year, depending on when we're able to schedule with them. But the thing is, this isn't that's not the end of the process. Like once it's approved by City Council, we have to think about what it looks like kind of at the micro detail of implementing the actions that have improved and diving into the details. And what does it specifically look like in West Oakland? Like what does that equitable implementation plan look like in West Oakland? What does the permit program for curbside chargers in residential neighborhoods look like in Oakland? That's like kind of, once this is just kind of like saying we're going to do it, then once it's approved by City Council, we need to follow, it's like holding us accountable to follow through. So yeah, I will leave it. If anyone has any other comments or questions about the end or about what's next, or if they have something that they saw that they want to say, let me know.
Miss Margaret, I can't tell if your hand was from before, if that's a new one.
Any last words? Well, thank you everyone for spending your time with us this evening. Hope it's been useful to you. It has certainly been useful to the city. And as Michael says, you will all be on the mailing list for the draft plan. So if you see something from the city about ZEVs, be sure to take a look. And they'll be looking for comments on that plan, I'm sure. So I want to thank you all once again. And I think that's the end of our meeting. Everyone can go have dinner.
All right, thank you everyone so much for attending. I really appreciate it.
Brian called me. This was Margaret.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for
You all.
coming.